Tonight, we begin with a development that U.S. officials, NATO analysts, and European intelligence services had feared, tracked, and privately warned could happen. A development that unfolded not over months or years, but in mere hours. Hours that reshaped internal dynamics inside the Kremlin. Hours that left Western observers scrambling to interpret the shift. Hours that forced Washington to issue a rare late-night alert. What Russia's top military commanders did today crossed a line that even seasoned intelligence veterans had hoped would hold. And when that line broke, the Pentagon did not hesitate. They responded with urgency, clarity, and a level of seriousness typically reserved for moments when the balance of power tilts even briefly toward the unknown. For weeks now, there had been signals, not official briefings, not formal statements, just signals that Vladimir Putin was preparing something uncharacteristically risky. Putin has been predictable in his unpredictability, yes, but he has been methodical in that unpredictability. His moves have followed a certain pattern, a cadence, almost a rhythm. But what set off alarm bells in Brussels, Kyiv, and Washington this week was that the rhythm suddenly went silent. Analysts who monitor Russian strategic command behavior know the indicators. The movement of specific high-ranking officers, the tightening of internal military communications channels, the unexpected recall of regional commanders, the sudden halt in routine logistical traffic, all of that went quiet. And whenever Putin goes quiet, it means something is about to get loud. For the last several days, the most seasoned Russia watchers described the atmosphere as suppressed electricity. Something was building, something was forming behind the curtain, but the outlines were still blurry. Then, in the early hours of the morning, the blur sharpened. Early this morning, Defense intelligence detected what they described as a coordinated internal disruption inside Russia's senior military command structure, including anomalous communications patterns that had not been observed in over a decade. These are the kinds of signals that Russia's top officers only generate when they are preparing something highly specific. A challenge, a warning, or a refusal. The Pentagon didn't know which category this fell into, or whether it fell into all three at once. But what they did know was that Russia's senior generals were shifting posture. And when senior generals inside a nuclear-armed state shift posture without explanation, even by a small measure, every major capital pays attention. By noon, intercepts confirmed what officials had only whispered earlier. A group of high-ranking Russian generals had pushed back against a direct order from Putin. Not delayed, not questioned privately. They refused to carry it out. And that refusal set off a cascade of emergency meetings across Europe and the U.S. The warning issued by the U.S. Department of Defense tonight was not normal. It was not routine. It was not symbolic. It was urgent. Briefing after briefing, meeting after meeting, senior defense officials described Putin's attempted move as destabilizing, unexpected at this stage of the war, and perhaps most importantly, highly unusual, especially given who stopped it. Because in Russian political culture, military defiance is not a gesture. It is a risk, a profound one. But defiance only matters if the target hesitates. Putin did not. And yet, neither did the generals. In fact, their response, described as collective resistance, was among the boldest internal acts of military disobedience analysts have seen in modern Russian history. Here's what we know. Within 90 minutes of receiving Putin's latest directive, a group of generals, reportedly including members of the general staff, blocked the operational chain of implementation. These weren't mid-level officers. These were flag-level commanders, men who have survived decades inside the machinery of the Kremlin, where loyalty is as dangerous as dissent. Their refusal triggered the Pentagon's urgent assessment. Russia's internal stability was, at least temporarily, in flux. Tonight, multiple intelligence sources confirmed that Putin's order involved the mobilization of a specialized strategic unit, a unit that had been placed on standby 2 days earlier for what analysts believed was a coercive signaling move toward Ukraine and NATO. The generals refused to execute it. They blocked the activation before the Kremlin could push it through alternate channels. They shut down the order at 3 points: Command Node Alpha, Command Node Delta, Command Node Kappa. All three nodes had been preparing to support the activation. In other words, the generals targeted the arteries, the components that would have made the order operational. This is what made the Pentagon's warning so urgent. Putin's directive wasn't just rhetorical. It wasn't symbolic. It was actionable. It represented the kind of move that could escalate the conflict dramatically if left unchecked. And the generals knew it. They didn't panic. They didn't flee. They didn't sabotage recklessly. They acted precisely. They shut down the order. They froze the unit. They isolated the communications link connecting the Kremlin to the command grid. They bought the world time. And here's where the story becomes even more extraordinary. Analysts now believe that Putin's latest move was designed to test the obedience of his military after weeks of internal tension, political reshuffling, and battlefield losses. Putin wanted to see whether the generals would follow an order that exceeded normal thresholds. But instead, the opposite happened. The generals didn't comply. They resisted. They pushed back quietly, professionally, and with enough coordination to prevent immediate retaliation against them. This alone shocked Western intelligence. You don't get open defiance inside Putin's Russia, not at this level, not on this scale. One Western intelligence officer described the moment as a stress fracture in the Kremlin's armor. Another called it the first coordinated act of military dissent since the late Soviet era. The general's move wasn't just strategic, it was symbolic. It signaled, "We are not going down with you. Not this time. Not on this order." And that is what alarms the Kremlin the most. As reports continued coming in throughout the day, we learned more about the scale of the refusal. A senior general in Western Military District Command halted the preliminary logistics transfer, preventing the unit from moving to its forward position. A counterpart in the Southern Military District suspended flight orders for 2 aircraft intended to support the operation. A third officer, stationed near Voronezh, reportedly blocked the encryption key exchange that would have enabled final activation. This wasn't just a refusal. This wasn't just bureaucratic slowdown. This was systemic resistance. This was internal obstruction at the command level. And that level of resistance is something Putin has struggled to contain since the early phases of the war. For every escalation he has pushed, someone inside the system has complicated his execution. Remember, Putin thought, his military hierarchy was unwaveringly loyal. His senior officers feared him more than they feared failure. His directives would always be carried out no matter the cost. But tonight, the opposite is happening. Loyalty is fractured. Fear is shifting. And obedience, the foundation of Putin's power, is now conditional. What makes this moment so volatile and so consequential is that Putin's order came at a time when he is facing multiple pressures at once. Hardliners want escalation. Oligarchs want stability. Regional leaders want distance. Military commanders want survivability. Putin is balancing all of these demands while facing growing battlefield setbacks and increasing economic costs. And leaders under this kind of pressure do not make calm decisions. They make desperate ones. The Pentagon statement, now distributed to NATO capitals, was designed to signal that the U.S. is not willing to allow unilateral escalations inside Russia to spiral unchecked. Pentagon officials stated plainly that Putin's attempted order was inconsistent with responsible military behavior, which, translated into plain English, means we consider this dangerous and destabilizing. It is exceedingly rare for the U.S. to critique Russia's internal decisions this directly. Tonight, they did. Meanwhile, Ukraine's president addressed his nation in a measured, steady speech tonight. He said, "We see what is happening inside Russia. We are not surprised." He said, "Those who start wars eventually lose control of them." And he said, "Our defense continues. Our partners stand with us." Not rhetorical flourishes. Signals. Clear ones. Here's what makes the situation even more concerning. Putin's failed order wasn't isolated. Alongside the attempted activation, Russian cyber units increased probing against NATO networks. State media abruptly shifted to new wartime narratives. A secondary intelligence unit increased activities near the Belarusian border. All of this within the same 24-hour period. When Putin moves multiple pieces at once, Something larger is brewing. Analysts are now considering several possibilities. Putin was preparing a coercive escalation to force negotiations. Putin was attempting to reassert dominance over his generals,